the empty desert, carrying with it the faint hum of alien machinery. Commander Tessa, Vane, shielded her eyes against the swirling sand, her gaze locked on the massive silhouette of the craft that had settled into the dry lake bed. It was not of this world. Its sharp angles and gleaming surface pulsed with an otherworldly iridescence, a subtle, mocking reminder of the intruder's superior technology. Behind her, a line of Earth's last soldiers stood poised, weapons raised, their postures rigid with a mix of defiance and fear. Tessa's calm crackled to life. "Commander, intel confirms it's a rebel faction," said the voice of Lieutenant Garza, stationed back at the base. "Not the main fleet. They've splintered from their own kind." Tessa exhaled slowly. Alien rebels. Infighting among the conquerors was rare, but not unheard of. It presented a sliver of opportunity, but also a host of new dangers. These weren't emissaries. They weren't diplomats. They were outlaws with nothing to lose. The craft's main hatch hissed, drawing every eye. A ramp extended with a deliberate slowness, scraping against the earth with a metallic groan. From the shadows within, a tall figure emerged. Clad in a shimmering suit that seemed to ripple like liquid metal, it moved with a predatory grace. Its face, humanoid but unervingly flawless, bore an expression of smug detachment. "Tessin Vane," it said, its voice resonating unnaturally in the air. The alien's command of her name grated on her nerves. "Your reputation precedes you." "And yours," she replied, her tone clipped. "I take it you're the leader of this faction?" A faint smirk tugged at its impossibly sharp features. "Leader? Hardly. We are beyond such primitive constructs. Call me Kale. I speak for the Ascendant." "Then speak quickly, Kale," Tessa said. "Why are you here?" Kale stepped forward, unbothered by the rows of human weapons aimed at his chest. His eyes, a piercing silver, scanned the soldiers with a mixture of amusement and disdain. "We sought refuge. But your kind lacks the vision to grasp such alliances." Tessa bristled. "You expect us to believe you're fleeing your own people? That you've suddenly decided humanity is worth aligning with?" Kale's gaze snapped back to her, sharp as a blade. "Believe what you wish. Your skepticism is quaint, Commander. But the truth remains. The Dominion hunts us as relentlessly as it hunts you. We offer knowledge, technology, tools to level the battlefield. In return, you provide sanctuary." "Sanctuary," Tessa echoed, letting the word hang in the air. "You think we'll shelter you, knowing your war will follow?" Kale's expression hardened, the faint smirk vanishing. "Do you think you have a choice? The Dominion already sees you as an infestation to be eradicated. With us, you stand a chance. Without us, you are nothing but insects beneath their heel." The soldiers shifted uneasily, the weight of Kale's words pressing down on them. Tessa held her ground, her mind racing. The proposition was poison wrapped in a silver bow. Kale's arrogance was matched only by the cold logic of his argument. They couldn't trust the rebels, but rejecting them outright might provoke an attack Earth wasn't prepared to face. As if sensing her hesitation, Kale extended a hand, palm upturned. A small, translucent device materialized in his grasp, glowing faintly. "A gesture of goodwill," he said. "Blueprints for a shield generator capable of repelling Dominion strikes. Consider it a taste of what we can offer." Tessa stared at the device, the promise of salvation conflicting with the undeniable trap it represented. "If this is a gift," she said slowly, "what's stopping you from taking what you want by force?" Kale tilted his head, a mockery of curiosity. "We could, but where's the fun in that? We prefer partnerships, however reluctant. It's more efficient and amusing." The ground beneath them trembled suddenly, a low rumble that grew into a violent quake. The soldiers steadied themselves, and Tessa's calm erupted with frantic voices. "Commander, Dominion scouts inbound. Multiple signatures closing fast." Kale's smirk returned, this time darker, more knowing. "Ah, how timely. Perhaps now you'll appreciate the gravity of our predicament." Tessa clenched her jaw. The decision loomed over her, urgent and suffocating. Accepting Kale's alliance might buy them time, But at what cost? Rejecting it could mean annihilation before the day was out. Fall back to defensive positions, she barked in her calm, turning to Kale. She met his gaze with steel in her eyes. If you want an alliance, you'll have to prove your worth. Fight with us. Show us you're more than empty words. Kale's laugh was a low, unsettling sound. A test? Very well, Commander. Let us see if your species is as resilient as your reputation suggests. With a fluid motion, he pressed a command on his suit, and a group of similarly clad rebels emerged from the ship, their weapons sleek and alien. They moved into formation with a practiced ease, a chilling contrast to the uncertainty rippling through Tessa's ranks. The horizon shimmered as the Dominion ships broke through the atmosphere, their angular designs bristling with menace. The battle was moments away, and every choice, every action, would ripple far beyond this desolate battlefield. Tessa raised her weapon, her voice steady despite the chaos. Hold the line. Make every shot count. Beside her, Kale raised an alien rifle, its surface alive with flickering energy. He glanced at her, a spark of something unreadable in his eyes. Let us see if humanity is worth saving. As the Dominion forces descended, the desert erupted into chaos. Tessa fought with everything she had, her mind a whirl of strategy and survival. But one question burned brightest in her thoughts. Had she just forged Earth's salvation, or its undoing? The battle in the mountains. The air in the mountain pass was thin and cold, carrying the faint tang of impending snowfall. Dane Ironvale tightened his grip on the hilt of his broadsword, his breath fogging before him as he surveyed the narrow trail ahead. The craggy peaks loomed on either side like jagged teeth, casting long, uneven shadows in the fading light. Behind him, the small band of warriors waited in tense silence, their faces pale but resolute. This is the only way through, Dane said, his voice low but firm. If we falter here, they'll overrun the valley by dawn. Lyra Ashfin stepped forward, her twin daggers glinting like shards of ice. Her keen green eyes scanned the ridges above. And yet we walk into an ambush, she muttered. You feel it too, don't you? We're being watched. Dane nodded. He had felt it since they had left the safety of the forest below, a prickle at the nape of his neck, as if the mountains themselves were alive and hostile. From the rear of the group, Tarlis Emberhand, the group's mage, whispered a quick incantation. A faint golden glow settled over the warriors, a protective spell that offered a brief sense of reassurance. If they're watching, he said, let them see that we are not easily broken. A sudden, sharp cry echoed through the pass, a sound that was neither human nor animal. The group froze. Positions, Dane barked. The warriors moved as one, forming a defensive circle. Shields were raised, and bows notched with arrows. Lyra melted into the shadows, her lithe form barely visible as she darted towards the rocky outcroppings. Moments later, the enemy revealed itself. Dozens of figures emerged from the rocks above, their dark, sinewy forms silhouetted against the twilight. They were not men, but not holy beasts either, creatures twisted by some dark sorcery. Their eyes glowed an eerie crimson, and their guttural growls filled the air like a rising storm. Darkspawn, Tarlis hissed. The first wave came with terrifying speed, leaping down from the heights with unnatural agility. Dane met the charge head-on, his broadsword cleaving through the first creature's chest with a spray of black ichor. The impact sent a jolt up his arms, but he held firm, pivoting to block another strike. To his left, Rhea Stoneheart, a towering shield maiden, braced herself as two of the creatures lunged at her. Her warhammer swung in a wide arc, shattering bone and driving her attackers back. Above them, Lyra moved like a wraith, her daggers flashing as she struck from the shadows. She took down one creature after another with surgical precision, her movements fluid and lethal. Tarlis stood at the center of the circle, his staff glowing with arcane energy. He unleashed a torrent of fire that engulfed the attackers, the flames illuminating the pass in a hellish glow. But for every creature that fell, another took its place. We can't hold them forever, Rhea shouted, her voice strained as she slammed her shield into an oncoming foe. We don't have to, Dane replied, his eyes darting to a narrow path leading up the ridge. We need to break through and reach higher ground. Tarlis, cover us. The mage nodded, raising his staff high. With a roar, he summoned a wall of fire that surged forward, momentarily driving the creatures back. Move! Dane commanded. The group broke formation, sprinting towards the path. The climb was steep and treacherous, the rocky terrain slippery underfoot. The Darkspawn pursued relentlessly, their guttural cries echoing through the pass. Halfway up the trail, a massive creature emerged, a towering brute that dwarfed the others. Its twisted horns scraped against the rocky overhang, and its clawed hands gripped a jagged club. By the gods, Rhea breathed. The brute let out an ear-splitting roar, charging towards them with thunderous steps. Dane planted his feet, his heart pounding as he prepared to face the monster. Rhea, with me, he called. Tarlis, hit it with everything you have. The shield maiden moved to his side without hesitation, her warhammer at the ready. Tarlis began chanting, the air around him crackling with energy. The brute swung its club in a wide arc, forcing Dane and Rhea to dive out of the way. The impact shattered the ground where they had stood, sending shards of rock flying. Dane rolled to his feet and lunged, aiming for the creature's exposed flank. His sword bit deep, but the brute barely flinched, backhanding him with enough force to send him sprawling. Rhea seized the opening, bringing her warhammer down on the brute's knee with a sickening crunch. The creature roared in pain, staggering but not falling. Tarlis now! Dane shouted. The mage unleashed a bolt of pure energy that struck the brute square in the chest. The creature howled, its massive form convulsing before it finally collapsed in a heap. The victory was short-lived. The remaining Darkspawn were closing in, their numbers undiminished. We can't fight them all, Lyra said, rejoining the group with bloody daggers in hand. Not like this. Dane's mind raced. They were outnumbered, outmatched, and the pass offered no sanctuary. But then he saw it, a narrow ledge that led to a cave mouth further up the ridge. There, he said, pointing. If we can reach that cave, we can bottleneck them. The group moved as one, pushing through the relentless tide of enemies. Tarlis threw up another barrier of fire, buying them precious seconds. Rhea took the rear, her shield a bulwark against the onslaught. By the time they reached the cave, they were battered and bloodied, their strength waning. The narrow entrance provided the advantage they needed, forcing the creatures to come at them one by one. For hours, they held the line, each warrior fighting with a ferocity born of desperation. When the last of the Darkspawn finally fell, the group collapsed to the ground, their breaths ragged. The cave was silent except for the crackling of Tarlis's conjured flames. Dane sheathed his sword, his hands trembling. This was no random attack, he said, breaking the silence. Someone sent them. Lyra nodded, her face pale but determined. And whoever it was, they know we're here. The weight of her words hung in the air. Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it the promise of more battles to come. Dane looked at his comrades, each one scarred but unbroken. They had survived this night, but the war was far from over. Rest while you can, he said. The mountains are not done with us yet. The fall of the alien rebels. The moon of Heliod sat cloaked in the shadow of its planet, a barren expanse of jagged obsidian and silvery dunes stretching endlessly beneath a thin veil of atmosphere. In its hidden valleys, far from the watchful eyes of the Galactic Coalition, the rebels gathered. Commander Etra Callian stood at the heart of the resistance camp, her slate-gray skin glinting faintly in the pale light of the twin stars on the horizon. She surveyed the scene. Engineers huddled around a makeshift transmitter, warriors sparring to keep their skills sharp, and scouts reporting their findings from the surface. Despite the hum of activity, attention hung in the air, fragile, electric, and heavy with unspoken dread. How long until they find us? Asked Vendrask, her second-in-command. His voice was as gruff as his appearance, a hulking figure whose cybernetic arm, bore the scars of countless battles. Not long, Etra replied, her tone calm but unyielding. The Coalition sentinels are relentless. If we don't strike first, it won't matter how deep we hide. Vin grunted his agreement, but his crimson eyes flickered with unease. And what of the artifact? Has it revealed anything? Etra turned toward the center of their encampment, where a translucent sphere pulsed faintly with shifting colors. The artifact, ancient and enigmatic, had been the reason for their rebellion. The Coalition had sought to harness its power to dominate the galaxy. The rebels had fought to keep it free. Now it rested in their possession, its secrets locked behind layers of alien encryption. Not yet, she admitted. But if our techs can decode its core matrix, we might have a chance to turn the tide. Before Vin could respond, a young scout bolted into the camp, her pale green skin slick with sweat and her breathing ragged. "Commander," she gasped. "Coalition dropships, approaching fast from the east. They'll be on us in minutes." The camp exploded into motion. Etra barked orders, her voice cutting through the rising chaos. "Vin, take the northern ridge and set up a defensive line. Sarah, evacuate the artifact to the fallback point. Everyone else, prepare to hold the line." As the rebels scrambled to their positions, Etra felt a pang of doubt. They had faced the Coalition before, but never on such uneven ground. The moon offered little cover, and their resources were dwindling. Yet surrender was not an option. Too much had been sacrificed already. Minutes later, the first Coalition dropships descended, sleek and menacing, their engines screaming against the thin atmosphere. Plasma fire erupted from their turrets, scorching the valley as rebel sharpshooters returned fire from hastily erected barricades. Etra crouched behind a ridge, her pulse rifle steady in her hands. Through her visor, she could see Coalition soldiers, faceless in their reflective armor, advancing in disciplined formation. Each step was precise, each movement calculated. They were everything the rebels were not: unified, well-equipped, and merciless. Vin's voice crackled in her calm. "They're pressing hard on the northern flank. We can't hold them much longer. Fall back to the inner perimeter," Etra ordered, firing a burst of plasma at an approaching soldier. The Coalition forces faltered momentarily, but soon pressed forward, their numbers overwhelming. The artifact loomed in the distance, its glow intensifying as if reacting to the chaos. Sarah and her team struggled to move it, their anti-grav sled sputtering under the strain. "Commander," Sarah's voice was panicked. "The artifact, it's destabilizing." Etra's heart sank. The artifact had been their hope, their purpose. If it fell into the Coalition's hands, or worse, detonated, it would mean annihilation for both sides. "Secure it at all costs," Etra commanded, sprinting toward the artifact even as the battlefield dissolved into chaos. Plasma bolts sizzled past her, but she pressed on, her focus unshakable. Reaching the artifact, she found Sarah struggling to stabilize its energy field, her hands trembling as she adjusted the controls. "It's reacting to the Coalition's weapons," Sarah explained, her voice tight with fear. "If we can't neutralize the feedback loop, it'll go critical." Etra glanced around. The rebels were being pushed back, their lines crumbling. Coalition forces were closing in, their precision devastating. Time was running out. "Can we move it?" she asked. Sarah shook her head. "Not without risking a detonation." Etra's mind raced. They needed a solution, something to buy time or turn the tide. Her eyes fell on Vin, who had taken a position nearby, his cybernetic arm glowing faintly as he directed rebel fire. "Vin," she shouted, "get over here." He joined her in moments, his expression grim. "What's the plan?" She gestured to the artifact. "We need to trigger a controlled burst, something to disrupt the Coalition's advance without destroying us in the process." Vin nodded. "I'll need to override the failsafes manually. It'll be risky." "Do it," Etra said. "I'll cover you." As Vin began his work, Etra turned her attention back to the battlefield. She signaled the remaining rebels to fall back to her position, creating a last line of defense around the artifact. Plasma fire lit up the sky as Coalition forces closed in, their relentless assault unyielding. "Hold the line," Etra shouted, her voice rising above the chaos. Her pulse rifle burned hot in her hands as she fired shot after shot, each one aimed to delay the inevitable. Behind her, Vin cursed under his breath as he worked. Almost there, the artifact's glow intensified, its colors shifting in rapid, chaotic patterns. The air around it seemed to ripple, charged with energy. "Commander, we can't hold them much longer," a rebel shouted. Etra gritted her teeth, refusing to yield. "Just a little more." Finally, Vin shouted, "Got it!" The artifact emitted a blinding flash, followed by a shockwave that rippled outward, knocking both coalition and rebel forces to the ground. The battlefield fell eerily silent, the air thick with dust and static. When the light faded, Etra rose unsteadily, her ears ringing. The coalition forces were disoriented, their formation broken. It was the opening the rebels needed. "Fall back to the fallback point," she ordered, helping Sarah to her feet. "Now!" As the rebels retreated, Etra cast one last glance at the artifact. It pulsed weakly, but remained intact, a fragile beacon of hope in the midst of despair. The battle was far from over, but for now, they had survived. And as Etra led her people into the shadowed valleys of Heliod, she vowed that they would rise again.